welcome to The Cynical Developer, explaining why you should bother with the latest and greatest in development technologies. In this episode, we speak to Gary Ewan Park about Cake. So we're joined with Gary Ewan Park today. A little bit of a background on him. He's been developing for the .NET platform for almost 9 years. His day job is developing with ASP.NET, AngularJS, WPF, for a lot of oil companies working in the North Sea. In his spare time, he contributes to open source projects including Chocolatey, Boxstarter, Cake, Psake and Git version. Gary's also a founding member of the Aberdeen Developers.NET user group that holds monthly sessions on the topic of the Microsoft.NET stack. So we're here today to talk about Cake, and not the type that you mix in a bowl, but something slightly different and technology related. So we're going to start off with what is Cake?
So Cake is a cross-platform build automation system. You might be familiar with other build systems like Fake, or one of the other projects I contribute to is called Saki. But the difference with Cake is that it uses a C# DSL. So anyone that's familiar with C# can hopefully get immediately started using Cake to start automating their build processes.
Right, okay. So it's a bit like Selenium, where you can write your processes in code and execute them outside of that.
To an extent. I mean, there's what I would like to describe as kind of your typical build workflow. You might have a compile step, where you're literally compiling the EXEs or the DLLs that you're actually building as part of your application. And then a next step might be to take those DLLs or EXEs and wrap them up into a NuGet package. On top of that, you might want to run some unit tests. And then on top of that, you might want to look to start doing some deployments. So there's various ways that you can do all of those things. But what Cake does, it lets you do all of those things in a task-based manner. So you can basically define a hierarchy of tasks to say, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to do next, and then and so on. But you're writing that in C# code. So if your main application development is happening in C#, which a lot of us do, then you kind of lose, or you don't have to do this mental mind switch to switch to another programming language or another scripting language in order to automate the build process.
Right, okay. So is it standalone? Do I need to put it into a build server or anything else like that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways of running it, really. So what we as in the Cake development team say is we kind of want our local builds to run in as close as possible to the continuous integration system builds that we might have. So we want it to be running locally on our machine in the same way that it would on another machine. That kind of alleviates the it works on my machine syndrome, where it only works on one developer's machine in your entire company. And if you try and build on somewhere else, then it doesn't work. So by itself, Cake can run by itself. You would run it. It's just an exe at the end of the day. So you can call that locally if you wanted to. But then we do have integration points with some of the CI systems that you might be familiar with to allow it to run in those environments as well.
Right, so these scripts that I write in C#, are they just script files? Are they compiled with Chocolatey as an extension or something?
So by default, you're going to have a build.cake file. So you as part of the setting up of the build process, you'll create what we call the build.cake file. And in that, it's literally just a C# code file. And what the cake.exe does is using Roslyn on the Windows platform. So Roslyn is the Microsoft compiler as a service. So it would take that build.cake file and compile it in memory. So it makes an executable form of that script. So the first hurdle, if you like, is the compilation step. So if you've got any C# syntax errors or anything that doesn't compile, that's not recognized, then you get that immediate feedback that something didn't quite work correctly. And then once you've got that kind of in-memory executable version of your script, it will then execute that and run off and do whatever you do within that. So, I mean, you spoke about chocolate there as an example. So if as part of your build process, you wanted to create a chocolatey package, the Cake engine knows about chocolatey, and it's able to call out to whether you want to do a chocolatey pack or a chocolatey push. You can define that within your build.cake file to have that happen as part of your build process.
That's really good. So you get the compile time information and things like that, which is good. So you can run it on its own. You can run it as integrated part of the build. Should I be looking to use this over other build servers like TeamCity, maybe cruisecontrol.net or whatever other build server I'm using?
So the really Cake really works in unison with the existing build servers or CI servers out there. So everything that I kind of discussed as the kind of top level tasks that you would want to execute, your compilation, your unit tests, all those sort of things. Typically within something like TeamCity, you would have individual build steps for each one of those things. So you would go into the TeamCity configuration, you would pick the NuGet build step, and you would define the properties that you wanted to contain within there, and you would create all of those build steps within your TeamCity configuration. Where Cake would come along is it would be a single build step within that TeamCity configuration, and all you're doing is executing Cake as that single build step. So you would still want to keep TeamCity or whatever CI system it is in place, because it's still doing the communication with the version control system that you're using, whether it's Git or Mercurial or whatever it is. It still has knowledge about, okay, this branch has been updated or this pull request has been submitted and so on. So Cake doesn't have tie-ins to the overall build orchestration, but what it does once that build has been kicked off is you can fully automate the build steps contained within it.
Okay. So if it's not replacing any of your build servers, it's just a bit of an add-on, a bit of a task runner in between. So does that mean that it has the ability to do deployments? Does it do multiple deployments and that sort of thing? Is it a counterpart in places for Octopus deploy? Can it do some things like that? And is it better than using batch scripts and PowerShell scripts?
So let's take the last part of that question first, and then I'll try to remember what you asked also. So the latter part is whether it's better than, say, batch scripts or PowerShell scripts. The bottom line is what we like to say is it's the with something like Cake, you're bringing with you the familiarity with the C# language that you're already using as part of your application development. So rather than having to kind of do that mental mind switch to, all right, what's the batch command for doing this, or what's the PowerShell command for doing this, you've kind of got that knowledge already because you're in C# land. You can do all the things that you can within .NET. Now, granted, you can do that within PowerShell because PowerShell has access to all of the .NET objects and types and so on. But what I found personally is, and within my own company, is once you start writing in PowerShell as part of the build scripts, you're the build guy at that point. You're the one person who knows how to modify the build and extend it to do some stuff, because people are unwilling to learn what's necessary to do the build scripts at that point. So by bringing in something like Cake, again, that familiarity, you are getting the advantage that everyone is able to immediately be effective at creating and modifying the build script. Now, when it comes to tying into things with what you mentioned there in terms of Octopus deploy, Cake, again, has knowledge of Octopus deploy. So Cake is not attempting to replace Octopus deploy, but what it can help you get to the point is that you're packaging up everything that's required in order to do that deployment. So Cake is not going to try and replace all of the kind of channels and multiple environment definitions that something like Octopus deploy understands and has knowledge of. But where you could utilize Cake is within the actual deployment steps that happen on the server that you're deploying onto. You can actually use Cake to do the actual installation and do the deployments that steps are contained within that. So rather than having, again, PowerShell files executing as part of the on the actual Octopus deploy agents, you could have the Cake being executed to do that stuff as well. So it really depends on where your comfort levels are and how many integration points you want to kind of step into.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd fit into one of the projects that I've been working. I've been looking at trying to enhance one of our deployment scripts. and we wanted it to automatically turn off certain app pools. We wanted it to disable a few different Windows services, a few web services across multiple different servers, which with batch scripts you can do it, but the error handling, if something fails and the rollback, is really hard to deal with in batch scripts. But I guess if you're using the .NET framework, you've got full exception handling, you've got your email reporting and everything like that, so you can actually add a little bit more intelligence to it, have full logging, have full reporting on it, and have some real user feedback. So I guess you could build it so that it could be used by people who aren't so technical, who are doing the deployments, rather than a batch script saying, "Oh, this is an error 1 or an error 2 or an error 3 or whatever." You've batched up yourself, and actually make it more effective. And as you said, I think it mitigates that barrier to entry by it being C#, because I've got very little experience with PowerShell scripts. It's always been one of those things that is down of, I really need to know that, I need to learn it, but just never got round to it. It's never been something that's been called for in my day-to-day job, and I guess that gets rid of that requirement to an extent that I can be lazy or effective. I guess it depends really how you look at it. Yeah, and just use Cake to fill that hole in my knowledge.
I mean, what we like to say is as well that you kind of mentioned the tie-ins to IIS and the other things that you want to do as part of like a deployment or rather an installation. So the core kind of Cake doesn't know anything about IIS. I mean, we have out-of-the-box support for lots of things, but IIS is not one of them. But what we do have is we've got a fairly active Cake community that have started creating what we refer to as Addins for Cake. So where the core Cake knows about like 40 different tools that you might want to automate your build with, the Cake community has actually come up with 70 different add-ins for various tools that extend Cake in what it can do. So an example of that is for one of the builds I've just been working on, is we now have the ability to send notifications to a Slack channel or to a Gitter room or to Twitter. So you kind of mentioned there that as part of the build, you might want to send some email messages when things weren't quite working the way you want them to, or whether things are successful. You've also got those integration points for things like Slack, which a lot of development teams are now starting to use as their kind of where all the information comes into. So now as part of a build, you can have various Slack channel messages going out to say what's going on and how things are progressing.
Yeah, so you've got a full plugin framework around it. So if there's something that someone hasn't written something for, or Cake doesn't do out of the box, I can go and write something bespoke to actually get the job done.
I mean, that's actually what I started in the Cake development team. I mean, I've only been a member of the team since, what year are we in now? Late 2015, I started on the Cake team. But where I started was actually developing Cake add-ins for some of the other open source projects that I work on. So I recognized that Cake didn't know anything about a tool called Git version or Git release manager, which I work on. So I use the add-in framework that's been in Cake since very early on in order to allow those tools to be used as part of the build, or rather as part of my Cake build. So subsequently, those tools have been brought into core Cake because it was kind of deemed that those were kind of fundamental tools that would be useful across the board. So they started life as an add-in, but they've also been brought into the core Cake project as well now.
Right. So you say that you've got communication channels there for Twitter and Slack and things. Now, we use Slack. It's something I've introduced to the dev team. I've tried to introduce it to the QA team and a few other departments in IT where I currently am. Not everybody's been very welcoming of it. The IT team have picked it up and run with it quite well, and we've implemented New Relic as our APM, and that has integration to Slack, but it doesn't really send a lot of information out. We've had it on there for probably the best part of about a month or so, maybe a little bit longer now, and I think I've seen one message from it. So the integration with Slack, I guess that is more like login the side of it. You tell it that you want to report on this stage and this step, and then if there was a problem, to report on that. And do you use it as a bit of a logging engine?
Not so much a logging engine, but I mean, where we've used it just now is as part of the Cake build script has knowledge of whether the overall Cake execution process has completed successfully or not. So has it gone through all the tasks, and has it been able to achieve everything it's set out to achieve? So where I've used it is, did something in the build process fail? If it does, send a message into the Slack room, and that message could be with an @ sign for mentioning an individual person who maybe made the commit that just caused the build to be created, and it could be say, well, @James broke the build. That's kind of where we've kind of used it just now. But I mean, Cake also has a concept of knowing when each individual task starts. So if you wanted to, you could actually have that going into a Slack channel to say, okay, starting the compilation step, starting the deployment step, starting the whichever step that you're kind of working on at that point in time. I haven't gone to that extent, but I mean, it's literally the Cake add-in for Slack is it's what we refer to as an alias, and that alias is I forget the exact name of it now, but it's literally send Slack message. So any point in your build.cake file, you can put send Slack message with whatever text you want to put in there, and it'll go off to the Slack channel of your choice. So it can be as verbose or as limited as you want it to be. So for me in the build that I was just doing, I use a notification to Slack to indicate that there was a build failure, and then when things go well, I send a message out to Twitter to say, okay, deployment finished, and you can find the new NuGet package here. And then I also send one to our Gitter room, which is kind of a more public notification channel. Again, I basically send the same notification to there to say build was successful, NuGet package got deployed, and you can find it over here. So that's kind of how I use it.
Right. Yeah, I was trying to sort of envision how or why you would want to publish it to Twitter, but I'd not really thought of the aspect of some of these open source projects that people would be interested in, to actually say, yeah, we've built it, we've created the NuGet package, we pushed the new version up to NuGet.org, and you can go and get it here. I guess it's more interaction with your audience and your users, isn't it?
I mean, so what we've created is, so we've got the main Cake Twitter handle, which is really intended for information about Cake itself when it gets a new version, but each of the kind of community contributions is handled on a separate Twitter feed. So whenever a new add-in gets created that we're kind of in charge of, we send a notification out. So anyone that's following that gets a notification, oh, there's a new version of this add-in. Oh, that's one of the ones I'm currently using. I'll take a note to go off and get that updated as part of my build process, so I can pull in any new features that are contained within it. So yeah, it's just an avenue for allowing people to know what's going on with the add-ins that they're interested in.
Yeah. Looking at your background and the types of projects that you work on, would I be right in assuming that Cake is a C# platform?
Yeah, so Cake itself is written in C#. So I mean, all of the guys on the team, myself, Patrick, who started the project, and Matthias, who joined them slightly just after it started, we're all C# developers, and it was kind of born out of Patrick had let's call it a disgruntlement with the build system that he was using. I think he was very much involved with MS Build and kind of low level build automation through the likes of modifications to CS proj files and target files and all that sort of things, and he kind of yearned for a mechanism to orchestrate the builds that he was creating in a language that he was familiar with. So when he kind of saw what was coming out with the likes of Roslyn and what other project teams were doing with the likes of script CS and lots of real-time compilation and execution engines, he kind of jumped on that bandwagon, and Cake was born.
Yeah, the Roslyn engine and that, I wish it was around when I first started with .NET, because I was very much into building a few different extras for games and stuff like that, and I built a lot of add-ons for Unreal Tournament, and to install those was an absolute nightmare to do it by hand. You had about 6 different text files you had to edit, whether you wanted to add and remove things. And I built something in .NET 1.1, which was an installer. And it was quite big back then and pretty useless because nobody had .NET installed, and very few people with dial-up could download them. But I ended up having to embed stuff into executables, and every time I wanted to do a new add-on, I had to go and actually rebuild a whole executable. Whereas I think with the likes of Roslyn and that, with the on-demand compiling, I think I could have done something slightly different.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But so now it'd be possible. Whereas I was shooting for the moon and not even getting off the ground back then. So at the start of this, you mentioned that it's cross-platform. Now, if that's built on the .NET stack, how have you made that possible?
So in the current version of Cake, so up to and including the latest version of the 0.15 release, in addition to using Roslyn as the compilation engine, we actually also use the Mono compiler. So depending on what system that you're actually running Cake on, it will either use Roslyn or it will use the Mono compiler in order to compile that build.cake file. So if you're running on Linux or Mac, it'll use Mono, obviously. And then if you're running on Windows, it'll use the Roslyn engine. Now, from a testing perspective, you can kind of force Cake to use Mono if you're running on Windows. There's just a flag that you can pass into it to say, actually use the Mono scripting engine. So that's kind of how we've, to date, been able to go cross-platform with all of the builds. Because, like I said before, what we're kind of aiming for is we want the build that we're executing to be the same regardless of which continuous integration server we're running on and also what environment we're running on. So the way that we kind of show what can be done is that we build Cake with Cake on, I think it's something like 8 different CI servers, and also on all 3 platforms, just to show that it can be done, but also to get early warnings of any problems with using Cake on those CI systems. So Matthias, the other team member, he is all about his continuous integration. He's literally been trying to find as many CI servers that he can get his hands on in order to execute our Cake build on as many as possible, so that we can kind of get ahead of the curve if there's any issues running on a particular system.
Yeah, so you're really dog fooding what's out there, and I guess that's it's a bit more comforting for the people that are coming out to use it, that you're actually using your system to build your system as well.
Absolutely. I mean, if we can't get it to work for us to build our own system, then we can't expect anyone else to do it on theirs. So yeah, no, we definitely like to say that we run as many CI systems as possible. So I'm just looking at the homepage just now on our GitHub repo. There are build successes and notifications for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different CI servers across all of the Windows, Linux, and OS X environments.
Right, and all that information's on the public Git repository.
Yeah, I mean, we don't hide any of that facts. So I mean, if you look at it just now, the Jenkins build is currently failing. I know exactly why that is, and it's totally my fault. I just need to get it to work. We recently added OpenCover to our build process for getting some code coverage metrics for our unit tests. And OpenCover doesn't like running on Jenkins in the way that we've hosted it, because of the way OpenCover kind of injects assemblies into the pipeline for processing.
Right.
We're running Jenkins on an Azure website, so it's not actually a full installation of Jenkins. So it doesn't like OpenCover being run on it. So I know exactly what the problem is. I just need to get some time to figure out what to do and how to get around that.
Oh yeah, I think that's the best failing build that you can have, when you know exactly what it is and you can fix it.
That's it. But
so,
I was just going to say, so to kind of finish off that thought process there. So what I said was, as of right now, we're using Roslyn and the Mono compiler. So going forward into the next version of Cake, which is soon to be released, which is the 0.16 release, we now have support for .NET Core. So .NET Core, obviously, as part of the announcement from Microsoft, is a cross-platform version of the .NET framework. So rather than having a dependency on Mono, we are going to start moving away from that dependency and instead taking a dependency on .NET Core. So whatever .NET Core can run, Cake will run as well. So we're still going to maintain the current version, so it's still going to be fully usable on the full version of the .NET framework. But if you have access for using it, then we have the .NET Core offering as well.
Right. So yeah, the last time I looked at .NET Core, it didn't have everything in there that you expect from your main .NET libraries. Is that a problem that you guys have faced? Is it something that's maybe holding you up and that's why you've got to support both? Or is there another decision why you're going to do a .NET Core and a full library?
It's mainly for backwards compatibility. I mean, what we don't expect is that anyone that's out there just now that's using the Cake engine is going to be in a position to move to .NET Core for all of their builds. So we need to keep the old version around simply because not everyone's on .NET Core. I think Microsoft wants everyone to be on .NET Core, but they're not there yet. So purely from a Cake perspective, we didn't jump on .NET Core in the early betas and preview releases. We kind of waited until the RTM came around. Now, we used the .NET Core accessibility tool that I think you can get as an extension for Visual Studio. So we knew that from a coding perspective, Cake was in the high 90% to say that we were compatible with .NET Core. So we kind of knew early doors that we were going to be in a position to port reasonably easy to .NET Core. Now, where we're kind of finding issues is that all of the tools that run today on Cake, they don't work on .NET Core. So although the main Cake engine will work on .NET Core, all of those tools that I spoke about earlier, they won't work because they don't run on .NET Core. So as an example of that, the Slack, Twitter, and Gitter notification systems that I mentioned earlier, they, as an add-in, haven't been compiled to run on .NET Core yet. So there's a scope of work in terms of getting the add-ins ported to work on .NET Core as well. So that's kind of where we're having some, not issues, that's the wrong term, but the core Cake engine will work on .NET Core. But if you have used some of the add-ins, then those won't run on .NET Core. So as a build engineer, you kind of have to know which tools run where and make kind of an informed decision about which tools and which ones I can use in this environment and on this and so on.
Yeah, I guess for all intents and purposes, it's a bit like writing it in a different language altogether. And those guys that have done all the add-ons for you just need to make them run on your system. And I guess for a lot of them, it's not really your problem. It's the guys that are supporting it and running those, exactly. Apart from obviously the ones that you support.
Now, what both myself, Patrick, and Matthias, we have as part of kind of normal Cake development, we have created a bunch of add-ons. So at some point, assuming we get some time, what we'll probably do is walk through the process of taking one of our add-ins and making it work in .NET Core. And then that will become a document somewhere, whether it's a blog post, whether it's a how-to article on the website, that this is how we took this version of the add-in and ported it to work on .NET Core. So that's something that's I've got that on my longer-term to-do list to do for the likes of the Twitter add-in. So I was the one who created the Twitter add-in, so I'm going to take that and make that work on .NET Core as well.
Right, and it's not just a case of jumping into Visual Studio and changing the target framework and building it from to target the .NET Core. Then.
I think that's what Microsoft want it to be. I think it's fair to say that it's not quite there yet. There are some hoops I think you have to jump through, and there's some at the minute there's the old project JSON that's probably been talked about a lot on Twitter in terms of this is how we were going to be handling all of the project template and definitions, but now we're moving back to CS proj files, so there's kind of some chopping and changing there to be done as part of going into .NET Core. But yeah, the basics of it are all of the code that you did have should run on .NET Core if it's got all the APIs are available. So something like Twitter is literally just making an HTTP call. So as long as I'm using in which I am, in the .NET Framework version, the standard HTTP client for doing that, the posts to the Twitter endpoint, that should be fully portable to .NET Core. It's just a case of getting the project template swapped over so that it's using .NET Restore and .NET Build now, as opposed to using MS Build as the standard mechanism.
Right, okay. So Cake is a C# application, and we've talked about using it to build .NET projects and how it's being ported across to use .NET Core. Is this something that only works with .NET applications, or could the evil side of the pond, those Java developers are out there, could they use it? Could we do it for real developers like C and C++ developers and things like that?
So this is kind of where my I'll be honest and say my understanding of all of these things breaks apart. I mean, I am a .NET developer at heart, but I know that, for instance, there is a CMake add-in for Cake. So anything that can be built using CMake, which I understand would be the likes of your C and C++ applications, they would be, you could orchestrate that process within Cake as well. I mean, at the end of the day, if it came to it, if there's not an add-in for Cake to allow kind of easy execution of a tool within the Cake core application, you can fire up any arbitrary process just using what we could refer to as the start process alias. So if you had some low-level tool that executed the, let's pick an example, the Java compiler, so that let's imagine that there's an exe that does all of the Java compilation. If you wanted to, you can orchestrate that process through Cake just by using the start process alias. And at the end of the day, what Cake is, it is that automation engine. It's literally doing this task followed by this task followed by this task. So although there might not be an alias that makes that a nice succinct kind of command that you would have within your build.cake file, there's nothing to stop you arbitrarily starting up any exe that you want.
Right. Yeah. So I guess one way or another, you could get it to do what you needed, and if it's just a process or a task runner, in essence, we could get it to everything and anything you wanted to. So
as you kind of referred to earlier, what you get is the benefit of the try-catch exception handling that you get as a standard. But within your standard application, you get all of that within the Cake tasks as well, plus additional kind of reporting as to whether the tasks execute successfully. So you get some benefit there as opposed to just throwing a find and forget against an exe and wondering what happened with it.
Yeah, and I think that is a really big benefit, and I think if I can get some time this week, it maybe next week or the week after now in work, I think I'll be getting rid of all those batch files that I've been working on for the automatic deploy, getting rid of all that junk that's in there, trying to make it safe, and so the deployment manager can run it, and actually just build myself some Cake and get on with it.
So from that point of view, one of the things that we have just added and will be coming kind of an improved version of it in the next release is the ability to also debug your build.cake files. So what you can do now is you can literally start up the cake.exe in a kind of a debug mode, and you can literally step through your build process. So you can see, okay, I'm getting to this task and I've got all of these variables set, or I'm going into this if-else statement within my task to do one thing or the other. You've got full accessibility to that within either Visual Studio and in the next release within Visual Studio Code, so you can fully debug all of those build.cake files as well. So that's kind of a big benefit.
Yeah, so you just do a remote, well, it's not quite a remote, but you attach the debugger to the Cake executable as that runs, I guess.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Or can you build it and run it straight from Visual Studio?
So as of today, as of right now, the mechanism would be you just kind of pass in the debug flag to the cake.exe, and then what would happen in there is it would give you the process ID that you'd want to attach to within Visual Studio. So you jump over to Visual Studio, you go attach process, find that ID, and then at that point you'll be able to step through the code. So that's it as of today. Soon to be released is a Visual Studio extension that allows you to, you might be familiar with the task runner for things like a gulp file or for seeing what tasks are available. one of our community members has just literally finished Visual Studio extension for Cake, so it can inspect the build.cake file and show you in the task runner what tasks you have available. And from there, you have the ability to start a debug session. Now, what he hasn't quite been able to get working is to automatically attach to the process within Visual Studio, but I know he's actively working on that to see whether that will work. But in Visual Studio Code land, in the soon-to-be released 0.16 version of Cake, it's literally you open the build.cake file in Visual Studio Code and you hit F5, and then you're in a debug session at that point. So depending on whether you're a full Visual Studio guy or whether you're happy in VS Code, there are some debug options there.
Yeah, that sounds great, kid. It's a bit of a funny one for me, is that I like my integration with Visual Studio, but there are some things that I don't like being in there, and the likes of version control and stuff like that. I don't mind it telling me what files have been changed and that, but I don't like doing my commits and pulls and pushes and things through there. So I'm very much a Subversion fanboy, and I've always liked to use Tortoise SVN within the shell of Windows. I've got quite a bit into Git cracking.
Okay.
That's really opened up GitHub to me. I always find the CLI a little bit of a barrier. Back when I was using Subversion before Tortoise SVN, yes, I was using that old command line, but I'm definitely not of the camp that command line's best, and you get all the versatility there. I'd rather have some nice pretty buttons that I can click and some menus that I can choose from and just get on with it. So having something like the ability to debug and build my scripts from Visual Studio is definitely something I'd definitely have, and I'll be looking forward to that once I can get to grips with actual Cake itself and write some scripts. Cool. So if I want to learn more about this and actually get on and start using it, are there any specific websites like Pluralsight courses or anything like that you or the guys in your community have produced, and where can I go and find out about it?
So we haven't quite got any Pluralsight courses yet. That's something that we've spoken about, but I don't think either myself, Matthias, or Patrick would be happy to do the Pluralsight course, simply because we don't think we'd be any good at it. But in terms of learning resources, I mean, what we like to say is that the Cake website is kind of the best place to get started. So that's just cakebuild.net. So what you'll find on there is kind of some top-level documentation about this is what Cake is and this is how to get started with it. But what we like to kind of reference people to is the reference section, because all of the code that we create within Cake and also the add-ins that get created, they automatically generate the website documentation. So all of the XML comments that people normally don't like writing into their code, we actually fully utilize that. So we use the summary tags, we use the returns, we use the remarks to generate the documentation of the website. So it's literally always up to date. And if there are any errors in it, it's a very quick change to the website to get that pushed out. So we like to point people there. On there as well, it's not there yet, but hopefully by the time this ships, there's a resources section that provides information about the likes of podcasts that we've been on, and also talks that have been done either by ourselves or in the community. So I recently did a community talk at NDC Oslo. So the video for that is on the resources section in there. So it's kind of an hour-long video of me talking about Cake, and giving an end-to-end demonstration of how you can build up that build workflow that I spoke about earlier, and showing how you can do that within Cake. So that would be the best place to get started.
Okay. Do you have any sample code out there for guys and girls that want to get in there and get stuck in without reading any documentation? Because everybody likes a bit of sample code that they can copy and paste.
So literally within the documentation site, it's the getting started tutorial is literally just that. It's here's a sample repository that you can clone. It's got like a very, very basic, I can't remember what it is. I think it's maybe a website, and it kind of talks you through what you need to do in terms of getting started, in terms of getting a build.cake file added into there, so you can start doing that build process. So it's very much driven by a documentation example, by giving you a repository you can clone and start building from there. So yeah, absolutely. And in terms of maybe a larger scale orchestration automation system, I would suggest looking at the cake source code. I mean, we've got a relatively complicated build in terms of what we do in terms of packaging up NuGet packages, chocolatey packages, pushing them off to MyGet, pushing them off to NuGet, unit testing, all that sort of stuff. So that would be an entry point as well to see what Cake is doing in terms of doing the build for itself.
Awesome. So just to sort of summarize this, it's not a deployment replacement, it's not a build replacement, it's something that works in harmony with your CI build, your build servers, depending on what you want to call them, and it's a task runner that helps you understand exactly what you want to do, gives you that little bit of ease of access because it's C# rather than some other scripting language, and gives you access to a lot of nice things like good exception reporting and handling, as well as integration. And if there's something that it doesn't do, then you can get out there yourself and actually write an add-on for it.
Yep.
Good. So all the things that have been spoken about in the podcast, I will add to the show notes. So the link for the Cake website, your NDC talk, and any contact details for Gary. I'll get them in the notes as well. So thanks for coming on and talking to us today about this. It's definitely opened my eyes to something new, and it's something I'm going to be picking up very, very soon and trying to force down the throats of my developers, because everybody should get their fulfillment of Cake, I think.
Absolutely. I think it's a great way to finish. Yep.
The show notes and any resource links for this episode can be found at cynicaldeveloper.com.